Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning.
I'm excited to be here for a bunch of reasons. It's always great to be back at KOTESOL. And I'm also very excited about our topic, language learning and the senses. Because the senses are so basic. Sight, auditory, haptic. Haptic may be a new term for some people. Some people call it tactile kinesthetic. Actually, tactile is touch, kinesthetic is movement. Put the two together and it's haptic. You've already learned something, and we're only a minute into this. Olfactory, smell, and gustatory, taste. And why this is so important is every bit of information your brain takes in. It takes in through the senses. The brain has two ways to get information. Sensory input, the senses, and memory, which is just kind of mentally recycling sensory input. So this is stuff we need to pay attention to. It's important for us as teachers. Now, all of the senses are very strong. So strong, I just learned this the other day. Did you know, I don't know if this is true in Korea, I know it's true in America. Starbucks employees are not allowed to wear perfume or cologne because the company doesn't want to mess with the aroma. I mean, senses are that important, that strong. They're all very important. Smell and taste are not particularly flexible. So they're not, because of that, they're not as useful in the classroom. But visual, auditory, and haptic input are things we ought to be working with every day, every class. You know, if you take a really classic activity like find someone who. Find someone who's one of those things that works in pretty much any class, any level. And it always works. And why? Well, part of it because of the personalization, of course. But the other thing that's happening with Find Someone Who is it's multimodality. It's visual. You got your page of questions. And you're looking at your partner. It's auditory. You have to understand the question you hear. You have to understand what your partner says. And it's haptic. You're moving around. So it involves all the senses. And quite frankly, the more senses we use, the more we learn. Yeah? Learning is about brain connections. And each sense has a different area in the brain. Different cortex. And so when we're using different senses, we're building channels. We're connecting the neurons, right? And the more senses we use, the stronger those connections. Yeah, so I think that's really important. I'd like to introduce another activity. It's kind of like Find Someone Who in the sense that it uses all the senses. And what I need you to do, this is called Around the World ABC. And the context is you and your partner are taking a trip around the world. You have to go to one place that starts with every letter. One place for A, one place for B, all the way to Z. Except no X, because like nobody goes to a Xerox store anymore. Okay? And what happens is, can you all stand up? And find a partner. 2's is best, 3's is possible. And turn and face your partner. And hold your hands out. And it starts out, Sean, will you be my example? Just start. We'll start out, we're going to go to A.
Australia.
Australia, that's good. I put Alaska there, but Australia is good. We're going to go to Australia, then we're going to go to Busan. And then I slap hands.
Okay.
And then you say,
we're going to go to Busan, then we're going to go to Busan, then we're going to China.
And we slap hands. Okay? So you're repeating what your partner just said. Okay? And this is a race. So when you finish, please raise both hands so I can see who's first. Ready, go! Have a seat. Some of the, I mean, that sounds really easy, right? Some of the letters. What'd you get for Z? What'd you get for Z? Zimbabwe. Zanzibar. Zambia. What'd you get for Q? Now, wait, this is interesting. Americans always get stumped on this. Aussies have it.
Queensland.
Yeah, Aussies get Queensland, Canadians get Quebec, and Americans get Q. Quincy, Illinois, right? Okay, okay. One of the reasons I like this is because, as I said, I've used it at many, many levels. So this is the going to future, right? At a little higher level, you do ABC picnic. You're going on a picnic, one thing with every letter. If you bring the apples, I'll bring the bananas. Okay. At an easier level, ABC nouns. Just, you have an album, I have a book. An even easier level, just the letters. Album, book, cat, dog. So you can use this at all kind of levels, but what I like about it is the multimodality aspect. It's visual. You had the language model up here. You're also making eye contact. You're connecting with your partner. It's auditory. You have to pay attention to what your partner's saying. And the slapping hands makes it haptic. It has nothing really to do with the activity, but it gets the learners more involved, and it gives you as teacher feedback, right? Now, the senses are powerful, the senses are strong, but there's a problem, a school problem. In school, we like things nice and organized, so we divide classes up, and there's literature and geometry and art and biology, and they're all separate. And there's a tendency with the senses to keep them too separate. And so you're visual, and so I'll give you something to read. And you're auditory, so here's a sound file or here's a CD. And you're haptic, so stand up and move around. And yeah, the senses are all different. They deal with different parts of the brain. But you don't want to divide them up too much. Because this has led to misunderstanding, inappropriate use of class time and activities, and even some very direct criticism. One of the most well-known critics is Dan Willingham at UVA, University of Virginia, and I'll show a video by him that outlines the criticisms. And there are at least 3 fallacies here.
Hi, my name's Dan Willingham. I'm a cognitive psychologist and a neuroscientist. I'm also a professor at the University of Virginia. I'm going to talk to you today about learning styles and how cognitive psychologists know that they don't exist. Now, the basic idea of learning styles seems to make a lot of sense. The idea is that different people have different ways of learning. So if you can teach in a way that's consistent with a student's style, he or she should learn better. There have been lots of these proposals over the years, like verbalizers versus visualizers, or analytic versus non-analytic thinkers. I'm going to talk about what is the best known, visual versus auditory versus kinesthetic learners. But what I'm going to say about this theory really goes for all the others too. So what are learning style theories? The idea is that the way that information is organized, or the way that you think about it, matters in how easily you understand or learn it. Suppose you're building a new house and you're trying to give your friend a sense of what it will be like. The visual learner will understand best by seeing the plans, the auditory learner by listening to a description of the house, and kinesthetic learners need to move, so your kinesthetic friend might build a model. The theory says that anyone can learn in any of the 3 ways, so the mostly visual person can still learn auditorily or kinesthetically, and likewise for the mostly kinesthetic person. But the brain doesn't work that way. It is true that you can store memories in any of those 3 formats. Suppose I ask you, what's the shape of a German Shepherd's ears? Most people say that they look at a visual mental image when they answer that question, and there is good evidence that you do indeed store that information visually. Or if I ask, who has a deeper voice, your best friend or your boss? You'll sort of listen in your mind's ear, and those sounds are stored auditorily. Kinesthesia is a little trickier, but it works the same way. Movements that you know really well, like riding a bicycle or tying shoelaces, will be stored kinesthetically. And yes, it's probably true that some people have clear, vivid images and some have weak, undetailed images. Almost any characteristic of people is going to vary, whether it's height or weight or visual memory. So in that sense, some people are good visual thinkers. Okay, so that's the scientific background, and it sort of sounds like the theory is right? Let me tell you what's wrong. Think about what the theory ought to predict. Here's a visual learner, and here's an auditory learner. Suppose I give each of them 2 lists of words to learn. For one list, I read it aloud, auditory presentation, and for another list, I show a series of slides, a visual presentation. Later, everybody gets a test. The prediction is straightforward. The visual learner should learn the slides better than the words, and the auditory learner should learn the words better than the slides. Lots of people have done that experiment, and that's not the result you get. The thing is, you don't learn the words visually or auditorily. Actually, an auditory test would be about what the particular sound of the voice was, the auditory quality. For example, did you hear shell or shell? And a visual test would be for the particular visual qualities of the slides, what they actually look like. When you just ask people to remember the words, you're really asking them to remember meaning, not sound or visual information. And in fact, most of what teachers want students to learn is not visual or auditory or kinesthetic information. It's meaning-based. For example, you know what the word opera means. For you, that's a meaning-based representation. And the meaning is independent of whether you learn the meaning by first seeing an opera or hearing an aria. Most of what's in your head, especially what you learned at school, is meaning-based. So you might think, okay, but the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic idea is still right some of the time, like when teachers want students to learn things that are not meaning-based. It's true, sometimes students might learn things that are essentially visual, like the shapes of countries on a map, or something that's essentially auditory, like a correct French accent. But notice what the theory's prediction would be. The prediction of the theory is not simply people with good auditory memory will be better at learning auditory stuff than people with average auditory memory. No one would argue with that. The prediction is that an auditory learner is always going to learn better if you present things auditorily, because that's supposed to be his or her best modality. Well, that's pretty obviously silly. You're not going to try to come up with an auditory presentation of the shape of Algeria. Everybody needs to see that. Okay, so let me summarize what I've said so far. It's true that some people have a better visual memory than other people, and other people are better at learning auditory material than other people are. But that fact isn't really all that important for teachers, because most of what teachers want students to learn is not particularly visual or auditory or kinesthetic. Most of what teachers want students to learn is based on meaning. The second point concerns the particular prediction of the theory. The important prediction of the theory is not that some people have better visual memory than other people. The prediction is that those people with a good visual memory will always learn better if you present things visually. But that idea is clearly wrong. When you've got something that you want students to learn that's especially visual, like the shape of a country on a map, everybody needs to see a visual presentation, not just those people who have really good vision.
Okay, you get his basic arguments, and there's some validity there, but I've got like at least 3 or 3.5 problems with it. The half doesn't really count, but the you know, you're going to make a model for your friend to show what your house is going to look like. That's setting up a straw man. Nobody would do that, but it's just setting up a false example so that you can knock it down easily. But my other problems with it are more serious. He is talking about memory. And yeah, memory can be stored in different ways, but most of the time, although as important as memory is in language teaching, we're not talking about memory, we're talking about getting stuff noticed in the first place. Noticing, and he's also presenting it as, okay, he's talking about the test. Did you catch the fallacy there? The test is not valid, and it doesn't prove what it says it's going to prove. Well, if the test isn't valid, it doesn't prove anything. So you can't use that test. And the other one, which is not his fault, it's not Willingham's fault, it's a problem of a way that learning styles has been misinterpreted. We don't want to do this. It's not a case of you're visual, so I'm going to give you only pictures to look at. You're auditory, so listen. Maybe close your eyes so you can listen better. You're haptic, so stand up and move around. We don't want to separate it like that. It's not like this. It's like this. Yeah? Our classes should be more like Jackson Pollock and less like Mondrian, right? They should be I like this because this is what my office looks like all the time. But we want to mix things together. Let me give you some of the reasons. What we're talking here is multimodality learning. And in clinical tests, this is from, do you know the book Brain Rules, John Medina? There's a brand new edition out. It came out last month. It's definitely worth reading. Medina reports in research that in clinical tests, when some of the groups get single input, single sense input, just visual, just auditory, etc. Others get multiple input. All groups get greater recall when they have multimodality input. Yeah? Also, and I find this really exciting, creative problem-solving tasks. Multimodality groups are between 50 and 75% more creative. Yeah? And I think it's just because it's like multiple perspectives. You know, for example, if I said, quickly, draw a picture of the Eiffel Tower, we would all come up with essentially the same picture. Something like that, right? Because I'm not giving you any time, but if we took some time and maybe looked at the history or looked at the point of view, look down at it, look at it at night, go under it, look straight up. Yeah, and we do it, and maybe we're doing this at a Perry Baguette or something. You know, we're looking at it in different ways. Perspective, how big is it? Look at it with humor. I saw this picture, I thought, that's gotta hurt. And I have to tell you, I'm American, and Americans are kind of famously bad at geography. So the point is, if we looked at it from a whole bunch of different ways, it's kind of like one of those movies where you see the same story from different perspectives. You become more creative. You have more ways to experience the problem. So this is what we want our classes to be. We want to make sure all the senses are there. And so it's useful to look at the senses separately so we notice that they're there. But we don't want to divide them up too much. I want to go to an issue that, this is a question that I learned from Alan Maley. And some of you, Alan has sometimes come to KOTESOL, so some of you may know Alan. And years ago I went to a workshop he did where he asked the question, where does pronunciation begin? And it really made sense to me. And now, at the beginning of every year, I ask this to my students, and they look at me with one of those, the teacher knows the answer he wants. Right, one of those. But eventually, some brave soul will say, mouth. And you say, yeah. And then you wait. And eventually, some will say, well, tongue and teeth and lips and voice box and lungs. And all of those are true. They're all partially true. The problem is these all treat pronunciation as if it was entirely mechanical, and it's not. And you have done, probably as a language learner, quite probably as a language teacher, mechanical pronunciation practice, right? Have you done like good old L&R? Light, right, lice, rice, yeah? And you've done those, and the students do that kind of stuff. And they get it, right? And then you finish, and they say, thank you very much, right? Because it doesn't seem to stick. Because it's treating pronunciation as if it was only mechanical, and it's not. Pronunciation has to be here, but even deeper, pronunciation has to begin in the mind. Where's the Korean mind? Now, I live in Japan, and the mind is here. And I'm American, and the mind is here. So I was just in the mind, right? And I point to both. People just follow me. Wait, so where's the Korean mind? Here? No, like a heart. Okay, so pronunciation beginning in the mind. How do you do that? It's actually not difficult. I mean, that sounds really abstract. It's not. You have in your handout the center page, a picture of the hand. Yeah. Does everybody have a handout? Anybody not? Okay, good. And at the top, there's a pronunciation box. I like putting a pronunciation box right before a pair work or a group work, so it gives learners something to work with. And how do you do pronunciation? Listen and repeat, right? That's, I mean, everybody. That's how God does it. I mean, it's just from the beginning. Okay, I want to do a quick listen and repeat. Now, I know you know how to do listen and repeat, but we're going somewhere with this, okay? I'll say it, you say it. What's the first line called?
What's the first line called?
It's the lifeline.
It's the lifeline.
What does a long lifeline mean?
What does a long lifeline mean?
It means you'll probably live a long time.
It means you'll probably live a long time.
Okay, that's standard, right? Now I'd like you to do listen and don't repeat. Well, actually, listen and repeat silently. Your mouth is moving, you're saying it, just no sound. But listen in your mind, okay? What's the first line called? It's the lifeline. What does a long lifeline mean? Did you notice the difference? When you're making sound, it's just, you know, what's the first line mean? Blah, 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 blah. It's just get the noise out there. When you slow down, when you're silent, you actually notice tongue, teeth, the mechanical aspects, just by slowing down and doing it silently. Try a couple others. We'll just focus on these, and I made them big so you can see it. I'd like you to, let's do it again silently, and notice what you hear in your mind. Notice the voice. It means you'll probably live a long time. It means you'll have to be careful. Whose voice when you repeated it? How many of you heard it in my voice? It was like a recording. Some of us. How many of you heard it in your voice? Okay, most of us. Can we do it one more time? This time, hear it in your own voice, okay? It means you'll probably live a long time. It means you'll have to be careful. Your voice? Okay. Now, I'd like you to imagine your worst student. That kid who is there because it's a required class, would rather be anywhere. Hear it in, let me guess, his voice? Okay, hear it in your worst student's voice. It means you'll probably live a long time. It means you'll have, yeah, it's hard, blah, 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 I know that, that's the pronunciation we're talking about. It means you'll have to be careful. Now, hear it in his voice, but with good, enthusiastic pronunciation. It means you'll probably live a long time. It means you'll have to be careful. Okay? Now, now we're going to get weird. Can I ask you to close your eyes? And picture the words, it means you'll probably live a long time. It means you'll have to be careful. Now, leave your eyes closed, but if you could raise your hand to tell me, how many of you see black on green? You're remembering the screen. Okay. How many of you see it like black on white, like if it's in a book? Okay, a lot of people. How many of you don't see it? And that's okay, that's many people don't. If you can see it, our grammar point here is the will future. You will. Do something with that apostrophe LL. Turn it red or underline it or make it neon, make it flash. If you don't see it, please write the words with your finger on your hand. And I think you will see it. It means you'll probably live a long time. And if you still don't see it, just imagine that you do, because this is an imagination activity. Okay. All right, you can open your eyes now. A couple more. What's this? Who thinks noodles? Yeah, good guess, but wrong. Pardon?
Rubber bands.
Who thinks rubber bands? Good guess. But you're wrong, but they do sell these at stationery stores next to the rubber bands. But these are actually mini pronunciation practice machines. And you should have gotten one when you came in. Can I ask you to put it over your two thumbs, like this. Go back here. Okay? And how it works is, it means you'll probably live a long time. It means you'll have to be careful. Great. With the person next to you 5 times. Go. What you're doing, you're turning pronunciation into TPR. It's becoming a total physical response. Two minor points on that. I prefer using really thick rubber bands, right? But I went to Daiso the other day and they don't have them anymore. So I just got these little ones and tied them together. But the other thing, at my university we do teacher training. And a couple years ago, I had a student, rather, a 4th-year student, who was going off for student teaching, and she came and said, "Mark, can I borrow the rubber band, the mini pronunciation practice machines?" And I said, "Yeah. Now you are going to be teaching junior high school 2, which means you have 12 and 13-year-olds, half of whom are boys. Do you want to arm them?" And so what we came up with as an alternative is pronunciation patty cake. Yeah? You know the kids' game patty cake, right? Yeah, exactly. And can you turn to your partner? It means you'll probably live a long time. Okay, you get the idea. One other quick thing. Now, patty cake is a kid's game, but I do this with adults, and I've never had anybody think it's childish. But it's certainly not hip. Now, if you want to be hip, what does the first line mean? It's the lifeline. What does a long lifeline mean? It means you probably live a long time. Yeah, you get the idea. You get that's free on the internet. OneMotion.com/ and it tells you in your handout how to get there. One last one. You know how your voice sounds different when it's recorded? Yeah, it's always weird. You can do that without a recorder. Plug your ears. So how this works is, what's the first line called?
What's the first line?
It's the lifeline.
It's the lifeline.
What does a long lifeline mean? Yeah, just by plugging your ears, you hear it in a different way, which means you're actually paying attention to what you hear. Yeah, that's what all of these are about, is paying attention to the pronunciation. And now, if we had more time, I'd have you turn and do the palm reading, but we'll skip that activity, okay? Because I wanted to just focus on the sensory aspect of what we just did there. We spent like 10 minutes working on pronunciation. What was visual? What was auditory? What was haptic? Okay, visual, when you were imagining it, and plus the slides. Auditory, hearing it, yeah, imagining the voice. But actually, I think that's the main one. But they were all auditory in that in every activity, you were paying attention to how you were saying it. And what was haptic? The rubber band thing, the slapping. Yeah, so we had a lot of different senses there. And then if we had gone on and actually done the palm reading, You've got the visual input of looking at your partner's hand. Auditory of listening to what your partner says. And not only haptic, you've got touchy. Appropriate touching, which releases oxytocin, which is a great chemical. It's the cuddle chemical. Hugging, okay? Can we put the lights back up? Another thing that's good to know about many presenters turn off the lights. Bad idea. Melatonin automatically is released in your brain and you go to sleep, right? So when you're giving a class, yes, use PowerPoints, don't turn off the lights. Okay, so how do we add this stuff to class? Well, on the back of this sheet, we have about 15 different sensory ways to have them pay attention to the language model or the grammar box or whatever you have in your textbook. And the way I do it in my class, I introduce 1 or 2 of them a week and keep changing them. And then eventually the students have a repertoire of different ways to work on pronunciation. Okay, I want to talk about, and this is what the guy in the video would disagree with, preferred modalities. We do have a main sense. Now, as he said, as Willingham said, everybody can learn in every different sense, and that's important. This is not about only presenting one way, but we do have preferences. We do have kind of default settings. And what's yours? Well, rather than me explain it, I have somebody else who can explain preferred modalities much better.
Nothing like the smell of Domino's cheesy garlic bread pizza.
Smell? Come on, man, it's all about the taste. Buttery crust.
What? Are you kidding me? Smell the garlic.
Taste the crust. Taste, please.
Smell.
Buttery crust.
Garlic.
Smell. Taste. Look at the cheese. Taste the crust. Man, that sounds good. Taste the new buttery crust. Smell it.
Okay. Now that for me is it epitomizes multimodality because they are all experiencing the same pizza, but they're processing it differently. And that's what's happening in our classes. All the students are experiencing it at the class, but they're experiencing it in different ways. So, I think it's a good idea. As a teacher, you need to know your own preferred modality because there's a good chance that's how you teach. Because that's default setting for most of us. How do you do that? How do you know your own? Well, become aware of your own behavior. How many of you come to a conference like this, or you go to a class and take beautiful notes? And many of us use nerd pens that have like 3 or 4 different colors. Yeah? Or do mind maps, and they're beautiful. And that's very typical visual behavior. And some people close their eyes so you can concentrate, you can kind of tune in. And at my university, our faculty meetings go on forever. Like a 2-hour meeting is a short one, right? Literally 3-4 hours. And I notice a lot of my colleagues will listen like this. And I'm not sure they're all auditory learners. But that's typical auditory behavior. And other people take notes and never look at them again. Okay? And that's very typical. And guilty laughter, don't be guilty. That's, you're not writing it down. We write it down to sort it out. But also we write it down because that's how we plug it in. Okay? So notice your behavior. Notice your language. Okay? Think about, we're like a half hour into this. Think about what I've said so far. And do you understand? But don't say yes, don't say no. Answer with an idiom. And some people say things like, I see what you mean. I get the picture. I hear you. Sounds good. Yeah, I can handle it. I'm in touch with that. When I first was told about this, I thought, garbage. These are language learners. They don't have that kind of range. Listen to your intermediate students. Beginners probably won't do this because they don't have the range. Intermediate students just latch on, especially if they're haptic. They latch on to something that makes sense to them. Finally, take a test. There are a few tests available. The one I have my students do is online. tinyurl.com, learning styles test. Or easier is just go to Google and search for aviator. Like aviator, like the pilot with a B. I don't know why. So the guy's name. Aviator style. Or easier, quick activity, one of my favorite activities, dictation. I'm going to say a URL, please write it down. tinyurl.com /ELT senses. tinyurl.com /ELT senses. You can check. Did you notice that was multimodality? You had to hear it, write it, and then look to check. And that will get you to a web page I made for this workshop, and there's there are links and a bunch of sensory stuff. Something I need to emphasize. Your preferred modality is not carved in stone, or in wood, or in gray matter. We have all of the senses. We use them all. Think of it as a default setting. Like, you might be very, very visual, but it's late at night and you hear something, but the lights are off. You can't rely on vision, so you get up and you're haptic, right? Because that's all you have. You know, think of it as default. It's the one you use when you can use anything. I want to do another quick activity. This is called body clocks. And I like it because it has the weirdest instruction I ever give. Yeah, I need you to think of 3 times. What time did you get up today? Don't say it. Just think. What time did you go to bed last night? And what time do you wish you could get up every day? Okay? And can I ask you to stand up? And when I said it has the weirdest instruction, the instruction is, you are a clock. Okay? What I want you to do is start with what time, you know, one of the questions, and for example, what time is it? Okay, I was thinking 3 o'clock, and I don't bother, you know, what if I wanted 9? I don't bother telling the students what to, let them figure it out. If I do this, and I wanted 9 o'clock, you say 3, I figure out, I'm backwards, okay? With your partner, 3 times, go. Okay, you've had enough time for at least one of them. Great, have a seat. Where's the VAH?
Looking at the person doing it.
Yeah, you were looking at your partner, so that's visual. You also glancing at the screen to remember the questions.
Asking the question.
Asking the question, and your partner said the time, and you had to check, was she correct? So that's auditory. And the whole thing. The body movement was haptic. And why did I have you do that right then? How long do your students sit during class? It's like, oh, in a 50-minute class, about 50 minutes. You know? And the problem is, when you sit for 20 minutes, we were not designed to sit down all day. We were designed to walk like 12 miles, 20 kilo every day. When you sit for 20 minutes, the blood flows down. There's a buildup of blood in the butt, lower legs, and feet. When you stand up and walk around for 1 minute, you get a 15% increase of blood to the brain. And that's oxygen to the brain. And I'm sharing this for 2 reasons. Number one, I think this is something every teacher should be aware of. Like, we get dumb when we sit down too long. And I'm giving you ammunition, because some of you have a principal or a DOS or somebody who like, excuse me, why is your class so noisy? Why are your students up and running around all the time? And you can say, did you know that if you sit for 20 minutes, you have blood going to, and your principal doesn't know that? It gives you an easy explanation. So I think it's useful for us to know. Look for chances to have students stand. Dialogue practice. Stand, gesturing is easy. Finding a partner, instead of turning the person next to you, stand up, talk to somebody you haven't talked to today, walk around. Drills and short speaking tasks, have them stand up for it. Okay, adding the VAH. In your handout, I took the kinds of things we do as teachers. Listening, speaking. Speaking ranging from very controlled things like dialogues and drills to more open things like discussion. Reading, writing, and I looked at ways, your book probably has visual, because books are visual. Most of the time, depending on the class, a lot of books now come with CDs or sound files on the net. So there's probably audio, there's probably not haptic. Here are some ways to add the missing modalities. Add on. Now, we have all of the senses. Visual trumps everything. Yeah? They say something like 70% of the neurons in your brain are somehow connected to visual. So we have to be paying attention. How many of you drive? Really? Only about half. I thought everybody in Korea drive. Because I was in Seoul the other night, early evening, and look, there was 70 million cars on the road. But imagine, you're driving along and you're listening to the radio, you're listening to music, or you're listening to news or something like that, and all of a sudden something happens. It starts raining really hard, or traffic gets bad, and it's almost like somebody turned off. It's like visual overrides auditory, right? So, just want to do a couple of quick experiments. One is a memory test. I'm going to say some words, and I'd like you to, don't write them down. Please remember them, okay? Glass, it's with an L, G-L-A-S. Glass, door, curtain, shade, ledge, sill, house, open, frame, view, breeze, sash, screen, shutter. Okay? We'll come back to those in just a minute. Before that, I want to just a quick introduction to the McGurk effect. And the McGurk effect is how, when we hear, we don't just hear. Sight has a lot to do with hearing. I'm going to play a very short video.
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba.
Okay, that was from Nova. What'd you hear the first time? Gaga, da-da, ba-ba. Okay, it's mixed up, right? And isn't it interesting? They're on my website. I gave you that webpage before. There are a bunch of examples. There's a BV example from the BBC that's even stronger. I didn't want to use that for the workshop because it's very difficult for native speakers of Korean to hear that at all. But it's very interesting how, for me this makes the point, wow, everything really is mixed up. Everything is multimodality. Let's go back to our list. Can we do that? Can we check this as a circle? As a yes, no? Okay. Circle means yes. X means no. Okay. Did you hear these words in the memory test? Glass. Curtain. Sofa. Window. Screen. Okay, now what was interesting is you did not hear sofa. That's no surprise. You did not hear window. You made it up. You confabulated it. These are the words I said, but they're all about windows. And you made a picture. And your picture probably had the wall of a house with a big window. Yeah? Memories are very inaccurate. We put together memories. Okay, so visual trumps other senses. What can we do as teachers? Use pictures. Use visuals. Use videos. Yes, it is worth the effort to make a PowerPoint, make a keynote, if it's visual, not if it's text. A wall of text is not visual. Yeah? Use pictures. If you haven't read Presentation Zen, read it. It's a very important book. Everybody should. It's about how to present well, how to make visuals. Useful information for us as teachers. When input is mainly oral, memory, and this is after 72 hours, students remember about 10%. When it's mainly visual, they remember 35%, so 3 times as much. When it's visual plus oral, 65%. 6 times as much. It's worth the effort to make a PowerPoint, make a keynote. If you can get your school to buy one of those video OHPs so you can just throw the textbook or whatever under it, it's worthwhile. I want to do about one more thing, and this will perhaps be a little weird. But, you say like all of the stuff? No, which is cool. I think this afternoon when I'm talking about brain stuff, novelty is really important. So doing stuff that's different is not just different for the sake of difference. It introduces, it's important for learning. But many of our students, because we're in Asia, many of our students come to school on mass transit, by bus, by train especially. I encourage my students to, instead of just looking at their cell phones, to take 10 or 15 minutes to talk to themselves. And I don't mean like, you know, the crazies that we see late at night who like are arguing with themselves and losing the argument. I don't mean like that. I mean talk to themselves silently. I encourage my students to just stare out the window and narrate. And it can be, if they're beginners, it can be nouns. You know, like car, building, boy, girl, whatever. And then they, you know, adjective plus noun. So, old bus, pretty girl, cute boy, you know, whatever. Or in full sentences and that kind of stuff. I often do this because my classroom, I've got a great classroom and it overlooks a forest where it's really hard to narrate action, like there's a tree, there's another tree. I mean, it's really boring. So I introduce it with a scene from the Hitchcock film Rear Window, the opening scene, because it's a great film. And there's so much action at the very beginning. And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to do this in the other language. So for the Koreans here, I'd like you to do this in English. And for the foreigners, I'd like you to try this in Korean to whatever degree you can. No, if you're new to Korea, it's going to be single words, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you've been here a while, just whatever level. Or, you know, Charlie came in yesterday, so or the day before, your Korean's probably non-existent like mine, you can do it in Japanese. I mean, in your L2, okay? And I'll model the first part, and then turn it over to you. Talk to yourself. It can be completely silent. It can be sub-vocalization, where like you're moving your mouth but with very little sound. It could even be mumble along. Did I didn't start right? Yeah. Oh, if you don't know the story, Jimmy Stewart has broken his leg. He's in an apartment just looking out the window. And so if I'm doing this, and, you know, I say, okay, I see a lot of words, and I can kind of see pictures. Probably better to look at this monitor. And the curtain is going, low level window, curtain up, old apartment, third window, and at a higher level I see the curtains going up, or the blinds are going up on the third window. And now in a moment, once the blind is all the way up, the camera's going to zoom out. You're going to see the courtyard. Please talk to yourself in English or in Korean. Okay, you get the idea. Can we bring lights back up, please? Thank you. Where was visual? The whole thing, you were watching it. Auditory. You heard the sound of the video, but more importantly, you were listening to yourself. So here's the tricky part. Where is haptic? Pardon? Okay, I hadn't thought of eye movement as part of it. If you were self-vocalizing, there's something that I find very interesting called mirror neurons. When you watch an action and you're paying attention, your brain is firing. I had an experience, I was in Kunsan yesterday, I took the bus here, and I happened to be sitting in the front row, and at one of the stops, this young guy, 22, I would guess, got on the bus, and I'm very near the door, right? He was getting on the bus, he missed a step and started to fall over, and I moved with him. And you see yourself doing this, especially like somebody's falling down, or sometimes in scary movies, where an action and you jump back. That's mirror neurons firing. So if we can direct our students to pay attention, now they're not going to spend the whole time on the bus or the train doing this, but if they get the usefulness of English, that 10, 15 minutes every day, it's fluency work. They're working on how smooth they can get it. Okay, I think we have time for one more activity. Can I ask you to stand up again? This is called Well-Balanced Students. If anybody's wearing high heels, this is really difficult in heels. I encourage my students to take off their shoes in class anytime. It's more relaxing. But can you hold on, actually not like in the picture, but actually hold on to your partner's wrists. And stand toes together. And lean back, you're making a V. Yeah. And you're actually balancing your partner. Yeah, that's it. Okay, guys, you are not standing like this. That doesn't count. You are actually, this is a trust exercise. Hold up your partner. You got 1 minute. What's your takeaway from today's session? What are you going to do next week to teach in a multimodality way? 1 minute. Okay, great, have a seat. By the way, you can use this, the well-balanced students, to talk about almost anything. It just adds a haptic task. And somebody asked me, like, so how long? Just until they fall over, it doesn't matter. No, once they get it, though, you can use almost any body posture. So you're leaning like this, groups of 3. You can also use it for, very, like, language-specific things. Like when I'm working on prepositions and adjectives, I'll have them stare at the wall for 1 minute, then change positions, and the partner asks, okay, where's the light switch? How many switches? What color is the thing? So, a lot of things you can do. So, I hope that I've made the case, despite Dan Willingham's important objections, we do need to be using all of the senses. We do need to be enriching our students' experience, not just with language, but language by teaching across the sentence. I hope it makes sense for you. I hope it makes sense for your students. And thank you all very much.
I'd like to thank Marc Helgesen for his wonderful presentation. Guys, we have a 10-minute break now. Our next sessions are starting at 11:20. Some of the concurrent sessions are